Hello, I'm Liz, one of Derry's reference librarians, and welcome to another episode of Misinformation Busters. Once a week, we tackle a rumor or a false or misunderstood story, and we try to separate fact from fiction. This week, we are talking about vaccines, but specifically the COVID cards and the idea of COVID passports. So, what's the story? Oh, vaccine misinformation, the gift that keeps on giving. With people starting to get vaccinated, there's talk of cards that provide proof of vaccination, and there are businesses that are starting to make vaccination ID cards, and even exploring the idea of COVID passports. Of course, a lot of the response to this hasn't been great, especially in the conspiracy world. People look at this as Orwellian and fear that if you can't provide proof of vaccination, you'll be barred from going to work, going to the store, and forced to stay in your home and starve. At least that's how Alex Jones puts it. In a way, the fear is that these cards will force you to get a vaccine via intimidation, and that this will become the new show us your papers. So, what are the facts? So this is a mix of fact and fiction, or more fact but being interpreted in a way that is fiction. Let's start with the vaccine or the COVID cards. It was announced in December of 2020 that vaccine report cards were going to be given to anyone who gets the vaccine. Of course, the conspiracy mongers took this to mean that this card was going to be the only way you could access anything from now on, and if you did not get a vaccine, you were sunk. In reality, vaccine report cards are common for a lot of vaccinations. It's not an ID card in the way that a passport is, nor does it have the same amount of personal information. This card will have your name, your date of birth, the name and maker of your vaccine, remember there's Pfizer and Moderna, and the date of your first injection. It'll also have the date for your second to act as a reminder, and then you can keep them for your records. How dastardly. Jokes aside, there has been some confusion over this. In the UK, the fact-check charity Full Fact had to issue a similar correction when news anchors referred to a similar NHS card as, quote, a COVID passport, misrepresenting what the card is. But there is actual talk of a COVID passport. Now that the vaccine rollout is happening, people are starting to think about travel, and there is the question of, are countries going to require a vaccine for entry? Which is a reasonable question. After all, countries have required negative tests to enter, or they'll require people to quarantine. Japan, for example, has restrictions that specifically said travel for tourism isn't permitted. In fact, the idea of actually require a vaccine to enter the country is not new either. Let's look at an older example of a vaccine passport with yellow fever. What is yellow fever? It's a viral disease that you can get from mosquito bites, and it's found on the continents of South America and Africa. In most cases, the cases are mild. You have fever, chills, nausea, but really severe cases can result in liver damage and hemorrhaging. The vaccine came into use in the late 30s, and those who were vaccinated received a yellow fever vaccination certificate. It's actually still recommended to get a vaccine if you travel. I'm actually pretty sure I got vaccinated for that and tuberculosis when I went to China. In some countries, will still require proof of vaccination if you're traveling from a country where transmission is common. So, the idea of proof of a vaccine for international travel isn't new, and the International Certificate of Vaccination and Prophylaxis was and still is a travel document. But where is most of the talk of the COVID passport coming from? I looked at the CNN article that I've seen shared around titled, "If you want to travel next year, you may need a vaccine passport." Most of the talk is not coming from world leaders. It's coming from private business. Same with the Forbes article titled, "A New Coalition Forms to Make a Digital Vaccine ID Card a Reality." These are articles about private businesses trying to make this a reality, not a government requiring it. And much of the article even discusses ethical issues with it and other problems that could come with this. And this is why reading beyond the headline is important. The only even remotely governmental body that's calling for this is the World Tourism Organization, which is a special agency in the UN. But even that was merely a recommendation. That recommendation was made at a meeting of the Global Tourism Crisis Committee, which met in January to discuss measures that can be taken in the travel realm to protect public health. And it doesn't mean any more than that. It's a recommendation. It's not a mandate. For the businesses trying to make a vaccine passport, its purpose is for international travel and going to events that may require vaccination proof, like a concert. It isn't for the purposes of keeping you subjugated. It's, from the perspective of the developers, for the purpose of making travel easier, which I can honestly see. It's easier to have proof on your phone rather than carrying and potentially losing paper documents, and unlike paper documents, It's harder to counterfeit. Still, I do see the concern with private companies having our medical information and making stuff like our vaccine history accessible via just a QR code. I have those concerns myself. We're increasingly giving medical information over to private companies. A similar conversation is happening over all these DNA sites. Is it safe to give this information over, and who else has access to it? Not to mention other concerns with this, such as poorer people who don't have access to this technology. The overall push towards digitization actually has done a lot to exclude people who don't have the access or have the skills. In fact, that recommendation for COVID passports, the World Travel and Tourism Council actually called that out as being discriminatory. And also, the World Health Organization isn't sold on this as well, mainly because current availability is too limited and we don't even know the impact on transmission. So these are all very real points that are getting lost in a more fantastical conspiracy of the UN locking unvaccinated people in their homes. Once again, this is a consequence of conspiracy theories, real issues, concerns, and discussions getting drowned out by exaggerated claims. As of right now, we don't know what will happen. Perhaps wealthier people in wealthy countries can have proof of vaccines on their phones. Perhaps the ICVP will still be used, both print and digital. What's important is to engage with the information presented. If someone shares that CNN link as proof that a coming totalitarian medical regime is going to happen, don't just accept it as such. Read beyond the headline, maybe look at some history, and look at who is saying what. And when we eventually get to travel again, check the CDC, the WHO, and embassies to see what is required for travel. Knowing the best sources is always best. Thank you for watching, and as always, check for our sources in the comments and feel free to research using our EBSCO databases available through the library's website, or when in doubt, ask a librarian. See you next week.